The Carnage Manica. One of the most misunderstood and mistreated pieces of utility in Dying Light 2. Mainly because of the way it was demonstrated and how it was actually performed. The way the game portrayed the Carnage Manica is a shield that has the capability of shooting out electricity like it's a fucking lightning strike, fire like it's flamethrower, and poison like it's a fucking nuclear power plant facility. But in reality, that it does next to nothing, and as soon as people saw this, they immediately threw it out the window. And that's the problem. Everyone was using it against the infected, and that's why everyone thinks it's bad. The main purpose of the Carnage Manica is to be used against the human enemies. Much like the UV light, that is extremely powerful against the infected and counters them, but extremely useless against the human enemies. The Carnage Manica is a powerful tool against human enemies, but not the infected, but people literally just fail to realize it. But let's talk about it. But you might be thinking, what is exactly the difference between the Carnage Manica's shielding and the normal blocking? Well, it's very simple. The normal blocking just simply allows you to only block lightweight attacks from human enemies, but is unable to block heavier attacks. And whenever you're completely out of stamina, instead of blocking all of the 100% of the damage, you block only 50% of it. The Carnage Manica, on the other hand, is able to block almost every attack except for one. You are able to block attacks against normal renegades, two-handed renegades, and bow users if you have this very specific skill equipped. I mean, the same thing applies to the normal one, but I'm trying to make it seem special, so shut up. One thing you should know is that you are unable to block any sort of elemental effects if a renegade has any. Regardless how many times you block it, the elemental effect will be applied to you, but the damage attack itself will be completely ignored. However, enemies that carry polearms or spears will always be able to pierce through you, regardless of if you did a perfect parry or not. It always kind of felt weird the fact that the Carnage Manica is unable to block polearms or any sort of like spear attack, which is kind of weird, but you know, I'm not really gonna question it, but regardless. You might be thinking, what about the infected? Is it even any effective against them?
Man, shut your...
No, it's useless. Don't use it, just stay away from it. Mainly because of three reasons. Number one being, the blocking mechanic is extremely useless against hordes of infected. Secondly, biters, virals, and voltos are still able to grab you and pounce you, regardless of how many times you keep blocking. Lastly, the voltos and other bigger enemies like goons and demolishers will simply pierce through your shielding no matter what, so stay away from it. So use a UV flashlight instead. So now you understand, UV flashlights and UV lights are for the infected, but useless against the human enemies. The Carnage Manica are perfect against human enemies, but extremely weak against the infected. But I'm not really saying the Carnage Manica against the shield is particularly bad, which I will get into that a little bit. But is it any useful overall? Yes, it is, but it gets outclassed by other utilities that it has in the game, much like the throwing knives, the shurikens, and etc, etc. They get outclassed, but I'm not really saying it's particularly bad. But it's good, but it sort of gets outclassed and sort of depends on the player. If you're someone that has thousands of materials and can craft items with no issues, and you don't really have to worry about running out of materials, then the Carnage Manica somewhat gets replaced because the throwing knife exists, the shurikens exist, and other utilities exist. So why would you be using this instead of anything else? But another good thing about it is you don't need to repair it. It does not have any sort of like durability, much like the other weapons or any sort of pieces of utility, much like the boomstick. But if you're someone that is struggling to keep up with resources and is struggling to get good utilities, then the Carnage Manica is always there with you. Mainly because it does not break whatsoever, and it does not have any sort of durability whatsoever, so you can keep blocking forever without having to worry about breaking. If your weapon has a specific stat where every time you perfectly parry an attack and heals you or recovers your stamina, then this effect also applies to the Carnage Manica, so you don't really have to worry about it. And another interesting feature about the Carnage Manica is the modification that you can apply. One thing I should say before I talk about them is never upgrade them unless they are the only ones left to be upgraded. Reason being is that it never makes them charge more quicker, but instead increase the base damage of the elemental effects themselves. And although I could be wrong about this, but please let me down in the comments. But regardless, let's talk about what each slot does and what each modifications could focus on. The rim modification simply applies a elemental effect on an enemy each time you perform a perfect parry, and a percentage chance is always at 10%. It just simply increases the effectiveness of the elemental itself. The shot modifications allows you to shoot out a elemental effect, the same thing with the shaft weapon modification on a melee weapon. The way it can be charged is either by killing, blocking attacks, or parrying attacks. Once it is ready, you can shoot it out instantly, or sort of like hold it to have it prepared. This is a perfect utility to keep an enemy occupied, or stun an enemy where you have trouble dealing with, making them much more easier to get rid of. However, it is somewhat hard to get the elemental effect to hit multiple enemies, so be wary of that. The slam modifications allows you to perform a ground pound type to apply the elemental effect to every enemy that is around you. You don't need to be in the air to apply to this, you can just simply activate it on the go, and every enemy that are like literally surrounding you will be instantly stunned. It charges the same way as a shot does, block, parry, or kill, but does take slightly longer to charge it up, so keep that one in mind. Keep in mind, you must have the Carnage Manica equipped on your arm in order to charge up these effects. If you don't have it equipped onto your arm, it will never charge regardless of how many times you parry an attack. Secondly, the charges you build up will eventually lose their progress if you aren't in a fight, so you're gonna have to move a little bit quicker if you don't want to lose the effects. And now you might be thinking, what is the best modifications? Well, that sort of depends on your personal preference, and each elemental effect has their uses, but what effect goes on which slot is up to you, and there is no right or wrong. I mean, shit, you can go and use all the same effects on every slot if you want to, but it's up to you. Because I'm not here to judge you. But let's get into the elemental effects and see what their purposes are. The freeze does the lowest amount of damage than every single elemental effect, but except for the poison effect, which I will get into that a little bit. However, it has the longest amount of duration out of any effect, plus the enemies will always stand straight, allowing you to instantly hit their heads much more easily, or do a combo easier, meaning that you can instantly whip out a bow and shoot them instantly in the head without having to worry about, missing them, because they're literally just standing still like a statue, and it allows you to hit them in the distance much more quicker with a gun or a bow. The fire shot is the one that focuses on spreading fire to other enemies. It deals slightly more damage than the ice, but it doesn't really last that long. However, the purpose is to spread towards other enemies much more easier, and whenever they are on fire, they'll be swinging their entire body around, which makes it hard to hit them in their head with a ranged weapon. But you don't really need to worry about that because they're already dying slowly, but regardless. The Toxic Shot shares the damage and duration alongside the freezing effect, but the difference between them is, instead of standing straight to make their heads easier to hit, the enemies will bend over and vomit on the ground, and whenever an enemy is hit with the poison effect, it allows you to vault over them to perform a specific combo, like a vault kicking, double jump to use the ground pound skill, or even running away with the far jump. It's up to you. Basically, it's a perfect effect for you to combo with it. The electricity effect deals the highest amount of damage than the rest of the effects, but has the lowest amount of duration than the rest of them. The electricity effect is able to be transferred and applied to other enemies if they're extremely close to one another, allowing you to be able to combo them much more easily. The enemies that are shocked will be in a standing position but will be shaking a bit, so you're gonna have to be a little bit more precise and ready to hit their heads, or otherwise the duration will be end. Because the duration is extremely short, so you're gonna have to make your shots count. And that is practically all I can offer about the Carnage Manica and give out my personal opinion. It is a underutilized tool that needs to be more recognized and more understood, because the way the people have been treating this is it's like a shield against the infected, but in reality it is a shield that was made to be used against the human enemies. Sure, it does have its uses here and there against the infected, but the problem is it is far less superior than the UV light, because the UV light is able to literally stun every single infected that is literally in front of you. But I'm not like saying like don't use this against the infected. It does have its few uses, but you're gonna have to be a little bit more careful with how you fight the enemies, because if you get pounced and you're surrounded, then you're practically dead. But regardless, that is all I have to offer about the Carnage Manica. A underutilized tool that needs to be more recognized by many, and I do generally feel like it is a perfect tool for the human enemies. But that is all I can say about it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Now, if you excuse me, I'm going to go and celebrate my birthday by committing robberies. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So I'll see you later.